Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder. Now, within this, there's various treatment approaches to this, and I'm going to talk from a personal point of view because as a child I had a form of OCD. So as I was younger, I used to have certain ways if I tidied my toys, they had to be done a certain way. My clothes had to be properly ironed. So actually when I was very young, when I got to about 5, I had ironed my own clothes. I was very funny about how my clothes were folded. My books had to be a certain order in height and so forth. And even when I was a child, because I used to want to do music, I used to collect vinyl records, and once I'd actually played them, I used to record them onto cassettes, and then I'd put them away and keep them in a sealed pack, usually like a cover pack, and never play the vinyl again usually. So I know what that is with OCD and how that can work. I actually started changing that when I got into puberty. When I was about 11, 12, I started changing from that. But before then, I was quite fastidious, and it used to be a big thing that I couldn't have dirt on me and so forth. So there's a lot of there's also a lot of misconceptions and things as well. So common OCD manifestations is the first one. Number one is contamination fears and cleaning rituals. So this can be excessive hand washing. I didn't suffer with this, but it's something I know many people do. But if I say I got spilled loads of ink on my hands and I couldn't get it off, that would be like, I couldn't imagine having one bit of dirt. And if also played in mud or sand, my hands had to be spotless. So I know how that can feel, and it can be very damaging too, because you can make the skin very rough, and it actually happened to a lot of people during COVID times as well. The fear of germs, dirt, or environmental contaminants is very useful. In certain environments can make you very wary of that. And avoiding contaminated objects or spaces. So the idea of people going into places where something was dirty. And I actually had a next door neighbour who actually I went to read with. I used to clean his house up all the time when I used to go there, even as a child, because he was dirty. So I know how it's very much this idea of things and how we can do it. So cleaning is a big one, and I'm going to do another talk about cleaning next today as well. Number 2 is checking behaviours. So your checking behaviours is repeatedly checking locks, appliances or switches. So sometimes when you turn a switch off, you're checking it. Sometimes you have a way of doing it one or twice to make sure it's on or off. Constant verifying that nothing terrible has happened. This is sometimes we get into the idea of, have we locked the door? We go and double check these things. And needing to check loved one's safety. Now this is where I know a lot of people, they're very wary of if their siblings go out, kids go out, so forth. It can be very damaging to people. A good example of showing this in a film is As Good As It Gets with Jack Nicholson, where he shows a routine of how he cleans his hands excessively with soap and replaces the soap every time. How he locks the door once or twice or 3 times until he knows it's done. And then he also goes to a restaurant and he has to have plastic cutlery because he can't have metal because he wants it always clean, they can chuck it away. So the other thing as well with OCD is number 3 is symmetry and ordering. And this is needing objects to be perfectly aligned. This is probably the one I noticed most when I was a kid. It was really an issue that if I had books or any toys, it had to be in a height order, or if books, they had to be like from the smallest book to the highest book. I don't do it so much now, but I still have that issue, and everything has to be in alphabetical order. I used to be that with my CDs, records, everything. Everything had to be in alphabetical order, or in genre, or groups, or so forth. So I know, again, this is an example of, some people would call this over excessively organised, but that's how people are. Repeating actions until they just feel just right. So sometimes you repeat an action until you get it right. And sometimes when they say practice makes perfect, for someone who's got OCD, that's an incredibly difficult thing to deal with. So you have to be wary of that. And the strong distress when things are not asymmetrical. So the things also, that can also be issues with when things, if you see there's something on the wonk, if something's not done properly, if something's propped up. I used to dislike that as well. When I used to go to things, I could see something was propped up on something that wasn't level. That used to annoy me a lot as a kid. One of the other issues with asymmetrical was also when I used to go out with my mum shopping, I used to go in mirrors and check that my hair, that I didn't have parting in my hair, but I made sure my hair was right, and there was no marks after I'd eaten and things like that, and also that all my clothes were right, like they were in line with everything. Which is why actually my mum used to sometimes get me striped clothes, because that would actually help me stop doing that. The other one as well is your intrusive thoughts, number 4. And this is unwanted, violent or disturbing thoughts. This can actually happen with a lot of people with OCD. That is where they can rise to anger very quickly. And this can be also where they get stressed. So when actually children, when they say they hold their breath, that's usually a form of OCD because they go, they hold their breath, and it's the way that they lose their anger instead of hurting people. Religious or moral obsession. So sometimes people can be very moralistic, and that can be a form of OCD because it's so compulsive that you think everything should be a certain way, and the world doesn't work like that. So again, I say OCD is sometimes very traumatic for a lot of people, especially children. And then the fear of harming others or self. So actually self-harm is actually an OCD issue. A lot of people don't associate it with that, but that's what it actually is. So self-harm is the idea that you're not perfect enough. And this can happen to, probably the worst star sign of this is the Virgo. Myself being a Libra, and I like balance. So again, this is sort of different things you have, what goes on. Now, the traditional medical approaches to OCD is medication. So this is selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors called SSRIs. I never had that as a kid. I used to have, if I used to have like panic attacks or calming attacks, I used to have lavender oil. So I was very used to having lavender oil, and I used to sniff that, or I had like what they were called Bach remedies, and that used to calm me down. So I used to get stressed at school and have panic attacks, it was called. But it wasn't, it was just like if I didn't get something right, I then would really stress about it. Other antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications is what people usually recommend, and usually prescribed by a psychiatrist. Again, I never went to a psychiatrist, but I did get assessed a few times because accordingly when I was at school I was answering questions not how they were written down. So for example, as a child, when someone says, what do you do with a knife fork, the idea is you would say, I use it to eat my dinner. My answer was, I use it to give to my mother to wash up, or my father to wash up. See, so it's like, because to me the obvious thing was you eat with it. So again, OCD is your attention to detail is very unusual for most people. The other one is traditional medicinal approaches is psychotherapy. So this is cognitive behavior therapy, which is about the way how you work cognitively about how you have a therapy or how you do something. And you can do that with going with timeline therapy and change that and find out where it's linked to. Exposure and response prevention, which is called ERP, and that's another one is to exposure. Say, for example, that's where people have fears or something, and it's actually getting them exposed to that and then learn to control that and control that with breathing. And group therapy sessions. Group therapy sessions with OCD people is actually probably a nightmare, I would say, to most adults, because if someone's very individualistic, they can't stand actually being around a lot of people. And that's where they have agoraphobia, or they fear the fear of being alone if they're on their own. That's why a therapist, it takes a lot of time to work that out. And also I'll be discussing that next week when I'm talking about the differences between narcissists, psychopaths and sociopaths, because that's also interlinked with that as well. So the other side as well is, when we look at this, is one of the things which I dealt with as a kid is lifestyle approaches. So your lifestyle approaches is modification. So it's regular exercise and physical activity stops a lot of OCD, because once you actually tire yourself out, or you actually get to a point that you actually don't worry about things, is because you get to the point that you're not so concerned about it. Your adequate sleep and consistent sleep schedule. One of the issues I had as a kid is that I didn't sleep very well. I was always thinking of things, writing, coming up with ideas, whatever that is, and you work with that all the time. Stress reduction techniques, again, that's where I teach that a lot with meditation and pranayama or breath work, and learning how to do that with breathing work. So I got to learn that when I was about 7 or 8, and that used to help me out a lot. And limiting caffeine and alcohol, and that's one of the reasons I don't drink alcohol very often, and I'm very rarely. I think I've drank twice this year of 2024, and probably won't drink much at all this year. And also caffeine, don't have caffeine in my diet, and I'm also not into eating chocolate either, which also causes caffeine inhibitors, enhancements. So again, you have to be very aware of that. And also sugar as well, sweets, too much salt, all that stuff is overstimulating and really a difficult thing for anybody who deals with OCD. Mindfulness and meditation, which is what I was speaking about, is the daily meditation practice. Again, when you're a child, if you're doing it for children, it's to do simple meditation, just have them in a corner looking at a candle or something like that, or just get them to do counting on their hands and doing that and working that out. Mindfulness-based stress reduction, and then deep breathing exercises. So deep breathing is also learning, and that also is useful when, another thing was always really good for me when I was had with OCD is actually going swimming. Because with swimming, it's like you're cleaning yourself and you're going, but actually even with myself, that was found when I was going swimming sometimes. if I saw kids or I heard kids say something they'd done in the pool or something, I'd have to get out, because if those kids said, I peed themselves, the idea of the pee, they peed themselves and they laughed about it, I had to get out of the water, didn't like it. So again, these are all sort of things you have to look at. And progressive muscle relaxation, you can do that with body scanning and just work out every part of the body to work that out. Now, your nutritional support is very important. So your balanced diet in omega-3 fatty acids. Now, when you're children, generally back then that wasn't really something thought of, but now as we go older, the balance of the omega-3, 6 and 9 are not so good, number 3 is better. So avocados, the fats of that, looking at olive oil, looking at things like that, and that's really useful for people to help them with. B vitamins, so B vitamins, a lot of kids used to have B vitamins, very common actually back then. They used to, I think it was Saragen or something like that it was called. Satagen or something like that they used to give you for kids, but obviously B vitamins also helps with the throat chakra as well, so it helps with communication. So bee pollen, honey, things like that, it's always good with B vitamins. Magnesium is probably one of the things most adults suffer with as well, so magnesium intake has to be taken up, but that also balances your serotonin issues. Reducing inflammatory foods, so not eating too much sugars, not eating too much overspiced, not eating too much over-salted food, fried food, things like that. Again, try and come up with a balanced diet. The more balanced diet you have, it helps. And that's one of the things I noticed was actually reduced with my mum. She knew that I had issues with certain foods, so she had to reduce the intake of certain foods. Alternative therapies is acupuncture. It's supposed to be very helpful to help people with OCD. Yoga practice, because of yoga practice you can then work that out into different ideas. Art therapy, which is where I went into, is music and art therapy, because with music and art, though you have OCD things, it actually channels your thought process into something, and it's also something called creative. So also that means that when you're putting your process into it's a form of control. So art, I wasn't so great at art. I was good at drawing like comic book style, but I wasn't good at art as much. But with music, that was really helpful. So learning to write my own songs, learning how to play the piano, I did all that stuff on my own. So that was, and then also had singing lessons as a kid later on when I was about 9 or 10, which really helped as well, because then that gave me a focus. So it was always practice. And again, with OCD people, it's really good to give them something to practice with or refine their skills. The other one as well, I would say, is natural supplements. And most people would say one is called NAC, which is called, and then in Inositol. St. John's wort is another one. Now, St. John's wort is a bit harder to find now because it's now getting regulated by the pharmaceutical companies. It's really good calmer. And then valerian root. Now, valerian root, you have to be careful if you've got low blood pressure because it can lower it more. But valerian root is really useful. So if you have that before you go to bed, or chamomile tea is really good to like reduce the stress levels and anxiety you have. Now the other one is going into this is integrated approach. So the most effective treatment often combines traditional and holistic approaches. So working with a healthcare team is really useful, and this is regular sessions with mental health professionals. This is if your OCD is really bad, and as a hypnotherapist I actually have had to put people to professionals to help them sometimes. But mostly if you're with OCD you can sort a lot of it out with a hypnotherapy session. Coordination between practitioners and tracking progress and adjusting treatments for that. Support system, family therapy when needed. That's also people talking in your family, knowing what you're suffering with, dealing with. My parents were really good with that. Even my father and my mother, they were really good. Like if they knew I used to get into panic attacks, or I had an issues, or I got hyperventilating, they knew how to calm me down. So it's really useful for that. And then we go into support groups, and then educational resources for family members. Also that is needed for schools, because when I was at school they didn't really understand OCD, and they didn't understand people with panic attacks, anxiety. It was kind of seen that you were the weird kid, and they didn't understand it. And also bullying is horrendous for children. It's not so bad now, but it was back then. I grew up in the 80s and early 90s at school, so very much that. Environmental modifications, so creating organised spaces, really useful for people with OCD. So have places where not too much clutter, not too much stuff, and working that out. Establishing routines, so that's the one thing you have with a lot of autistic children, they don't like routines being disturbed, and OCD people are exactly the same, so it's a big thing. Reducing triggers in living work environment, so sometimes that's why you find a lot of people with OCD can't work in other people's space, like an office space, It's too disorganised. If they can work at home and work for, that's why a lot of people are very good, if they've got OCD, are very good at self-employment. And you meet a lot of people who've OCD have also do very practical jobs. So they're plumbers, so forth, and they're very like fastidious, very tidy people. Stress management is identifying your stress triggers, and this is where I think where hypnotherapy really works for people, because when you find out the stress triggers, it's actually go back and find out where they come from, and usually it's from childhood. So then you can work with that, reframe it, and change it so you don't have them so much. Developing coping strategies, again, very useful, and then building resilience. And everything, this is a big thing of all this, it's important to know that OCD treatment should be personalised. It's not a grand thing to work for everybody. And what works for one person may not work for another. Any treatment plan should be developed under the guidance of qualified healthcare professionals, especially when combining different approaches. So if you are interested in, or you have an issue with OCD, because I do know about the subject when I was a child, as also an adult where I've worked with people, please let me know. My name is Rich Clark. You can message me here on YouTube, Instagram or LinkedIn, and I am redoing my website at the moment, so I will be able to set them programs up for you. And also I do free consultations, so if you do message me and you want to do a free consult, then please do so. Anyway, until next time, speak to you soon.